How many pieces can someone sacrifice in a single game of chess and still win? The game I'm about to show you comes close to answering that question. This is the Immortal sacrifice game, which was played in 1993 between Grandmasters Greg Serper with the white pieces and Ioannis Nikolaidis with the black pieces. This game has so many nuggets and pearls for anyone learning to play dynamic chess, and the ending is just fantastic. Serper starts us off with c4, and after g6, e4, bishop g7, d4, d6, knight c3. We kind of started out with the English opening with c4 from white, but we're really transposing here into the King's Indian defense, and after knight f6, we're very firmly in the King's Indian. Here, white played knight ge2, and you may be wondering, okay, why does white block their bishop in? Isn't moving the knight to a square like e2 not a very good move, especially since the knight's going to have to move again? You kind of have to understand that in this opening, the idea is that the knight comes to e2 so that the knight can eventually come to g3. That allows white the option to always push this f-pawn. If white had simply played knight f3 right away, this f-pawn would be stuck behind the knight. So pretty common move for white in this scenario. Knight ge2, and after knight b d7, we get knight g3. c6 from black, just shoring up these squares here. Bishop e2, white developing their pieces, a6, bishop e3, and h5 from black. The idea is that this knight is kind of awkwardly placed, and so if black could push this knight off the square with a move like h4, that would be advantageous for black. White continues with f3, and then we get b5 from black. You may be wondering in this scenario, why didn't black just play h4? Well, the idea here is that white's knight is just going to come back to f1, and then after a move like b5 from black, striking here on the c4 square, white can just relocate their knight to d2, and this knight's very well placed and supports the center quite nicely. So instead of playing h4 right away, black elected to play b5. And here, what do you do as white? If you capture this pawn, black captures back with their a-pawn, and now black owns this semi-open a-file. Their queen can jump into the attack, and they can also push this pawn with tempo on the knight. So not something you really want to do as white. You really don't want to capture that pawn. And so instead, white pushed playing c5. After d takes c5, d takes c5, black shoring up kind of this weak pawn here on c6 with a move queen c7. We get castling from black, and only now after white has castled, black plays h4. This knight's got to go somewhere. Not a whole lot of squares available to this knight. The only place the knight can go is h1. And the next couple of moves are really illustrative of what Grandmasters do in the middle game. We've finished the opening here, and what Nikolaidis as black is about to do here is to pick a weak square in white's position, and all of the next 4 or 5 moves are going to be about exploiting that weakness. So looking at this position right here, it would be really nice if black could get complete control of this f4 square. From controlling this f4 square, black's going to have be able to make inroads right into the white king side. And so how do you get control of this square? Nikolaidis plays the move knight h5. And you can see already 2 attackers on this f4 square. White defends that square with queen d2. And now we get e5. So again, another piece coming in here to support this f4 square. White plays knight f2 in this position, the idea being that the knight can now come to d3 and add some support to that f4 square. And so how does Nikolaidis continue adding pressure to this f4 square? He plays knight f8. The idea being that the knight can now pop up to e6, and now we've got 2 knights, a pawn, and a queen all keying in on this weak f4 square. And so what do you do in this position if you're white? Serper figured if he's going to put his knight here on this square, like knight d3, you're just going to get knight e6, and then the power of black to control the square is just overwhelming. So Serper realized that the fight for that square was lost. What he needs to do is attack on the other side of the board. So he played a move like a4, really forcing the issue on the queen side. As black in this position, you don't want to capture this pawn because after takes, white's knight has a really nice outpost here on b6. And so what black did is black pushed b4. And here we get the first sacrifice of the game, and that was the fantastic knight d5. A really great move, putting pressure on the queen. And again, if black doesn't take the knight gets this great outpost here on b6, would just be devastating for black. And so after c takes d5, white took back with the pawn. You may be wondering why white didn't capture back the queen with the tempo on the rook. The problem is that after the rook moves, this queen and this pawn here are kind of awkwardly placed. So taking back with the pawn, now white has 2 passed pawns, and this is another thing Grandmasters do. They'll sacrifice pieces, but the compensation is always worth it. And in this case, 2 passed pawns on your opponent's 5th rank so early in the game is definitely worth the price of a knight. Black plays f5, and after d6, queen c6, we get the second sacrifice of the game, and that is bishop b5. What this does is it pins the queen to the king with the bishop, and so black is forced to take, and after a takes b5, a takes b5. And so in this position right here, this rook is under attack. If black captures the white rook, they lose the queen. So black has to move the queen and try and defend this rook. The problem, though, is that if the queen comes back to b7, white's going to have a move like c6, and now what do? If the queen comes up, you're just going to pick the rook off, and if the queen tries to stay in the game with something like this, white's going to have queen d5, and now black's position is just completely falling apart. So in this position, Nikolaidis figured that he might give some material back to try and improve his position, so he plays queen takes b5 and gives up his rook. So the black rook just came off the board. After queen c6, attacking the white rook, Serper gets his other rook involved with rook fa1, and then we get f4 from black here. And Serper's next move was a great move. Obviously, this bishop's under attack. You're going to lose this bishop. There's nowhere for it to go. And Serper did something you should always do in chess, and that is he put his rook on the 7th rank. So important. The reason why a rook on the 7th rank is important is because it limits the mobility of your opponent's king. Here, black did not take the bishop. Instead, black played knight d7. And you may be wondering why black didn't take the bishop, but let's just say black did take the bishop here. Go ahead and pause the video and see if you can find the winning move for white in this position. Okay, so if you pause the video and found the move, congratulations. The winning move for white is queen d5. I mean, what a move right here. The queen is obviously, looks like it's hanging, but after queen takes, we get rook takes c8, and this is checkmate. So a really fantastic move. The only way black would be able to stop this is by playing knight d7, and then the queen gets lost. So it's actually a move that sacks the queen or wins the queen, depending on how you look at it. So for that reason, black did not capture this bishop. Instead, black played knight d7, the idea being that now black can castle, and if black can castle their king to safety, then white's attack kind of is stymied. What do here is white to keep the attack going? You sacrifice another piece. Rook takes c8 check. And after queen takes c8, what we did there is we deflected this black queen away from the defense of this all-important d5 square, and now white's queen can come into the attack with queen d5. After f takes e3, we get queen e6 check and king f8, and then we get rook takes d7. And here, white is threatening checkmate on f7, and so how does black defend this? Black would have to bring their queen over to e8, but before doing that, black gives their opponent an opportunity to just blunder the game away. So after e takes f2 check, what do you think white did in this position? Would you have taken this pawn? Well, taking the pawn is poison, because what happens here after king takes f2 is queen takes c5. And actually the best move for white in this position is actually king e2, allowing this knight fork where the king and queen get forked. The reason why king e2 is the best move is because a move like king e1 is actually a mate in 10, and I'll just show it real quick. After queen c1 check, get some dancing around with the king and queen, another knight sack from black, you capture the pawn back with tempo, and eventually you get to this kind of really juicy checkmating position. So that's a mate in 10 right there. That's checkmate for black. And so this is just a great reminder in chess. Don't just take things. This pawn looks like it's just an innocent pawn that can be taken, but the best move for white in this position is actually the move that Serper played, and that is king f1. Another motif in chess. Anytime you have a pawn that you can just put your king behind, this pawn really can act as a defensive barrier against black's pieces. And so black still has to defend against checkmate, so queen e8, and here we get rook f7 check, a rook sacrifice. After queen takes f7, we get queen c8 check. The whole point of sacrificing the rook was to get the black queen off of the 8th rank, and so we can check along that rank. And then after queen e8 blocking check, we get d7, a really great pawn move from white. This pawn kind of attacks and defends at the same time, a really wonderful move. And after king f7, d takes e8 queen, and after rook takes e8, we get queen b7 check, rook e7, and then just icing on the cake here, c6. White offers their queen again. The idea being that if the rook captures, the pawn captures, and none of the black pieces will be in time to prevent the pawn from queening on b8. So what Nikolaidis did is he played e4 here, and now if captures, this black bishop will be able to come to e5 and cover the queening square. So that doesn't really work for white. So white played c7, and black played e3, giving white another opportunity to blunder the game away. In this position, what would you do as white? I think the most logical and the first move that kind of jumps out at you would be c8 queen. The problem with this, though, is after e2 check, the king can't take the pawn because the rook's defending the pawn, and so the king would be forced to take on f2. We get e1 queen checkmate, and you may be wondering, like, can't the king just capture the queen? The problem is this rook still defends the queen even though the rook is pinned to the king. So really interesting position. In this position right here, huge potential for white to throw the game away, but Serper found the best move, and that is queen d5 check. After king f6, we get queen d6 check, the queen forking the king and the rook here. And after king f7, white just repeated the position, and that's because these two grandmasters playing in classical time controls, and so with queen d6, we reach move 40. They both get a little bit more time on their clock. And after king f7, queen takes e7 check. After king takes e7, now we play c8 queen. And here, what black did is bishop h6, just trying to shore up this weak e6 pawn. And then the next series of moves was really kind of maneuvering around with the king and queen, causing some checks. So queen b5 check, king d8. The whole point being eventually getting to this position where the queen is forking this king and this weak g6 pawn. So after king d7, we get queen takes g6. Now white's going to pick off one of black's minor pieces, and black, just with one last attempt to get white to kind of screw up the position, plays e2 check. Go ahead and pause the video and tell me which pawn you think white should capture in this position. So congratulations if you found the right thing to do in this position. The right thing to do in this position is to hit that like button, because we really appreciate it and it helps us out on YouTube. But no, the correct move in this position is actually king takes f2. If you play king takes e2, black has this really nice knight f4 check, and forking the king queen, the king's gonna have to move back, and then you lose the queen and the game. So you don't want to do that as white. And so the best move here is king takes f2, and then one final attempt at black to kind of pry victory from the jaws of defeat, and that was bishop e3 check. Obviously, if the king takes the pawn, you have the fork we just talked about, where the knight will be forking the king queen, so you can't take the pawn. And if the king takes the bishop, then the pawn queens, and that's no good for white either. So Serper played the best move in this position, the winning move, and that is king e1. And it was in this position on move 48 that Nikolaidis resigned the game. So really an incredible game. I mean, so many pieces sacrificed for white. I think the queen you're seeing on the board at the end is actually the third queen that white has had in this game. Really an incredible game, and so many great pearls about how to sacrifice pieces. And you saw from this game that a lot of times when pieces were sacrificed, it was to gain an attacking initiative or to gain a huge positional advantage like double passed pawns. And so keep that in mind when you sacrifice pieces in your games. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of our other content. I'll put a link right here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.